Hi everyone, thank you so much for joining me today. So in today's video, I'm going to be sharing 3 ways to use this stencil. This is the Art Flower stencil from A Colourful Life Designs, and I really want to show you how one stencil is so versatile, even just by changing up the colours or the mediums that you're using to create your card. So we're going to be using our embossing powders, we're going to be using some Gina K Designs dye ink cubes, and we're going to be using some Astro paste in Frostbite. And I really want to just show you that stencils are so versatile, they're really affordable, and they're a great way of extending your supplies and finding different ways to use them and create completely different looking cards with what you've already got in your stash. So I've already cut some card panels down to size. They all measure 4 1/4 by 5.5 inches, but of course you can make yours whatever size card that you like to make. And I've got my Waffle Flower Grip Mat, and I'm just going to place the stencil over my card. And I really want to show you that although the full design would cover a 6x6 panel, you can use this stencil on whatever size card you want. Pick a section of it that you want to use, or any stencil that you've got in your stash. You don't have to use the whole design. And so even just changing the section of the stencil that you use can change the whole look of a card as well. So don't be limited by the stencil in its entirety. Think outside the box and think of different ways that you can use sections of your stencils to extend their use. So first off, I'm going to keep it nice and simple, and we're just going to do some ink blending. I'm using the Moonlit Fog ink cube from Gina K Designs, and I'm going to be using Sweet Mango for the flower head as well. Now, what I love about these dye inks is even though they look a little bit blotchy when you first put them down, when they dry, they've got a smoothing agent in them. So they smooth out and you almost get an airbrushed looking finish. So these are really forgiving, especially if you're new to ink blending. So I've just been using a bit of copy paper here just to kind of mask off the stem so that I don't contaminate the orange. And then that is the first panel inked up and ready to go. And we'll pop that to one side and we'll turn it into a card a little bit later on. So to change the look using the same stencil, the first thing I'm going to change is the colour palette. So now I'm using Wild Lilac and Grass Green. And again, I'm just going to ink blend through the stencil. Again, I'm using the copy paper to just mask off the areas. And I have shifted the stencil over slightly. So we've got a slightly different perspective of the flower here. And so even just subtle changes can really change the whole look of a stencil. But we're not just going to leave it here with the different colours of ink blending and a slightly different perspective of our stencil. What I'm going to do is add some Astro paste over the top of it. So Astro paste is a glitter paste, it's from the Simon Hurley range, and Frostbite is a clear glitter, so it takes on whatever colour you've got underneath. Now, because these are dye inks and they're water reactive inks, they will react a little bit with the Frostbite. Now, I'm not too worried about that because I'm not going to overwork the paste. But obviously, if you do overwork the paste, what will happen is the Frostbite, as you're spreading it, it's going to pick up some of the purple, pick up some of the green, and you could end up mixing the colours a little bit. But I'm just going to be careful to make sure that I don't overwork it, and then that way we won't have too much of a problem. I have got a little bit of a tint of green to the leftover paste, so I'm popping that just on the edge of the pot so that when I come to use it again, I don't mix it in with the rest of the Frostbite, but we can still use that. Then I've removed my stencil, and I'm just going to remove the card panel from the grip mat, being careful not to stick my fingers in the Frostbite paste, and then I can go ahead and wash my grip mat as well. So you don't want that glitter to dry on it, and you can just wash it off in the sink with some water, a little bit of hand soap or dish soap, and then you're good to go again. So while that's drying, we're going to go ahead and create our third panel, and this time I'm changing the colour of cardstock that I'm using. So I've got a very pale pink card, and we're going to do some heat embossing. So I've just used my anti-static powder bag just to make sure there's no grease marks from my fingers or any residue on the cardstock, and then I can go ahead and just hold the stencil in place with my magnets. So I just want to show you that even if you don't have a grip mat, if you've got a magnetic glass mat, then you can use your magnets to hold the stencil in place as well. Now I'm going to use the Wow Embossing Ink Pad, and I've got a blending brush, and I'm just going to press that into the ink pad to collect some of the ink onto my brush, and then I can use it through the stencil. Now, because it's quite a detailed stencil and the magnets are not going to hold the stencil in place as firmly as the grip mat would, I am just being careful when I'm using my brush to kind of brush in line with the pattern of the stencil so that I'm not kind of going against the stencil. And then also I can just use some pressure from the brush as well, so like a dabbing motion or a pushing motion, and that way you can transfer the ink without shifting the stencil too much as well. I also find it helpful to move the magnets as I move around the stencil, and then that way that helps to keep it in place as well. And because I'm using a small blending brush, it means that I can control where the ink's going. So I'm making sure that I just do the flower petals at this stage so that we can use 2 different types of embossing powder. So I'm going to bring in a scrap of paper and then we can go ahead and add our first embossing powder. And this is Pastiche. It's from Wow Embossing. It's a gorgeous glitter opaque marbling powder. It's got chunks of clear glitter in. It's got flecks of gold and lots of white powder. It's really, really pretty. It was actually one of my favourites from the release this year in July. So if you've not seen it before, definitely check it out. It's just a really gorgeous powder and so much fun. So I'm just using a paintbrush just to get off some of the powder where I got it where I didn't want it. And then we can just go ahead and pop the excess back in the pot and then we can heat set it. Now, because it's very chunky, you definitely want to heat set from underneath. So I'm making sure my heat tool's nice and hot first of all, and then we can go ahead and heat set that from underneath. And the powder is just beautiful. It takes a few minutes just to melt the chunky bits of the powder as well. But I really hope that you can see some of the detail picking up on the camera here. It definitely looks stunning on that pale pink background. And because it's opaque, it would look great on any colour cardstock that you're using as well. So once that's all heat set, I'm just going to let it cool for a second. There is a tiny bit of warping, but that's not a problem. As it cools down and we attach it to our card later on, that warping will go. But of course, if you're concerned about any warping, just pop it under a heavy book. Just give it a few hours just to flatten out again if you're really particularly bothered by some warping. But yeah, generally, once it's cooled down, the warping kind of dissipates. So you don't have to worry too much about that. Now again, I'm just coming in with that Wow embossing ink just on the leaves and the stem, and I'm just being careful to get the brush in the stencil areas that don't have embossing powder yet. And because the stem is so fine, I'm going to come in with the Wow Embossing Pen. So this is embossing ink in a pen form, and I'm able just to draw a line down the stem, and then that way I know that the embossing ink is just in the stenciled area. So next I'm going to add another opaque embossing powder. This was from the Seth Apter Quad, the Citrus Quad, and this is called Olive. It's green with hints of like mustard yellow in, and then like chunky clear glitter bits. So again, this is a really fun powder to play with, but because it's opaque, it means that we can use it on colour cardstock. And then again, I'm just heat setting that from underneath because we don't want any of those chunky bits to blow off. And then we get a lovely smooth heat embossed finish. So I think that looks really, really gorgeous. So let's start turning these panels into cards. So first of all, I'm just going to trim my panels down. So I'm trimming this one down to 3 3/4 by 5 inches. And then I've got this grey cardstock and I want to create a matte layer that's 4 inches by 5 1/4 inches, but I go ahead and mess all my measurements up, so I'm ending up chopping up a lot more of that card than I wanted to, but that's okay. That's what happens sometimes. I'm sure I'm not the only one that does this. So we'll pop those to one side, and then I'm going to trim down this panel, and I'm not going to put a matte layer behind it, so I've trimmed that down to 3 3/4 by 5 inches as well. Now I've got this Hello stamp set from Concord and 9th. I'm not sure if it's still available, but if it is, I'll link it below. And I'm just using the acetate from the packaging to just kind of help me work out which sentiment is going to look good and where I want it to be placed. So I do decide to go with that solid bold Hello stamp, and I'm going to use my stamping platform because at this stage I really don't want to mess up my card. And because it's a bold stamp and I'm going to be using black ink, I'm going to need to ink it up a couple of times probably. Now, if you watch my videos, you'll know that I normally love to use my acrylic blocks, but occasionally I do use my stamping platform, and this is one of those occasions. And I'm using some VersaFine Clair Nocturne black ink, and I'm going to just ink that up a couple of times so that the sentiment is nice and bold over that ink blended background. I'm just using my Gina K Designs stamp chamois just to wipe off my stamp, and then I can go ahead and pop it back in the packaging. I've got a Sizzix sticky grid and my stamping platform, so I've just put the protective cover back on that, and then I can go ahead and just glue my card layer to that matte layer of grey, and then attach it to my A2 card blank, which I've custom made from the Creative Craft Products US sized cardstock that Craft Stash is selling. And then I'm just going to add some card bling just to finish off the card. This is from a Colourful Life Designs. It is the Crystal Opaque Tangerine, and they're like flat back sequins without the hole. And then that is the first card finished, and I really love how this one turned out. Despite it not being a normal colour palette that I choose, I really was happy with the end result. So for the second panel, I'm just going to pop it up on some foam tape. Now, you really don't need this much foam tape, but I was being lazy and not cutting it down, and I decided that actually, do you know what, I'll pop it all up on foam tape. So you've got a lovely thick bit of foam tape on the back of this. I've added some liquid glue just so that I've got some wiggle room time, because I want to make sure that it's nice and straight and even on my card blank. And then I've got this lovely sentiment die from Concord and 9th. It says So Grateful. And I've die cut the shadow from white card. And then I've die cut the So Grateful from a slightly darker pink cardstock that I had in my scrap pile. And so I'm just going to glue that down with the liquid glue. And then I'm going to add a little bit of foam tape on the back of it. And I really love how this sentiment really complements the card. So again, I'm just using my Tim Holtz scissors here just to trim the foam tape down and cover the whole back of that, and then I can go ahead and just remove the backing paper and stick it down. Again, I'm adding the liquid glue so that I can just make sure it's nice and straight. And then to just finish the card, I've added a few gems from the Whiteout mix. Again, these are from A Colourful Life Designs, and I really love how this card turned out. Completely different look, but another beautiful finished card. So for the third card, now the frostbite is dry, you can see all that lovely shimmer that we've got over the inks. And what I love about the frostbite is that because it's clear, you could literally use it with any colour ink that you've got, and you've instantly got a different coloured glitter paste all the time. So it's really, really versatile. So if you're looking to invest in a glitter paste and you're not sure what colours to go for, definitely get the clear first of all, and then you've got literally any colour you could possibly want. So I've just cut a little black matte layer, and I'm just going to glue that to the card front that we've created. And again, I'm just using some liquid glue here. And then I decide to pop it straight down onto the card blank without adding any foam tape or anything. I thought we'd keep this one without any dimension. So again, we get a completely different look. And we've got a lovely white border around the outside, and then that black matte layer really helps draw your eye into the centre. So once that's all stuck down, I'm going to add a sentiment. This is the Funky Flower stamp set from Gina K Designs, and I'm going to use that just because sentiment, which I've white heat embossed on some black card. And then I've used the coordinating dies to cut that out, and you get two separate words. And I'm going to stick those down nice and flat on my card front, and then I'm going to add some of the card bling again. I'm going to add the Satin matte black sequins, and again I'm just going to use my wax pencil and stick those down, and then that is the third card finished for today. So let's just take a look at the three cards that we've created today, all using exactly the same stencil, three completely different looks. And of course, once you start, you could just keep going. There's just endless ways to use a stencil and create lots of different cards. So I hope this has given you some inspiration today. I hope that it's helped you to look at your stencil collection in a different light and give it a go. See what you can create with the same stencil with all your different supplies. As always, everything that I've used will be linked in the description box below. Please don't forget to hit the thumbs up button and leave me a comment. It really helps me out. If you're not subscribed to my channel but you've enjoyed this video and you'd like to see more from me, then please consider subscribing, and I'll look forward to seeing you in the next video. Take care.